part of our issue right now is I don't know what our identity is exactly right now, and we need to find it as a group, whatever that is. I think it's huge for us to try to find that identity, and we got to make it that, right? We got to find our identity. It's not on the coach, it's not anyone else. It's on us, and having that fight as a group to establish an identity.
Hi everybody, Missi Matthews. Welcome to the Matchup Show presented by Unibet. A lot to unpack there. That was Mason Cole speaking to the media yesterday. We are going to talk about the short week Thursday night football in Cleveland against the Browns. They lost in week 2 as well. Let me introduce you to our panelists to get things started. We have Dale Lolley, a Steelers.com contributing writer and editor, Hall of Famer Arthur Moats, also on SNR. And KDK's very own good friend of the program, Bob Pompeani, kind enough to join us as well. And Dale, when you heard what Mason Cole said in the locker room, what were your first thoughts yesterday?
You know, I think identities are something that are formed over time. I think Arthur could agree with that. You never come right out of the gate and know what your identity is, especially when you have as many new guys on offense as what the Steelers do, a new quarterback, a new wide receiver, 2 new offensive linemen, a bunch of guys who are in their second year on that offensive line as well. So, that identity continues to evolve as the season goes on, but you'd like to see them start to try to, build the foundation of that here over the first month of the season. And I don't know that we've seen that just yet. They've not taken the shots down the field. All throughout training camp and in the offseason, we heard a lot of, well, we got to get chunk plays. We want to make, splash plays on offense. And we really haven't seen them try to do that a whole lot thus far early in the season. I know Mitch Trubisky talked about taking more of those opportunities down the field today when we spoke to him in the locker room. I would expect to see more of that. Now, can that be an identity? It can be part of an identity, but I think you also have to, build some other things with that as well.
Yeah, Dale, I think you're 100% right. When you're talking about creating an identity, yes, on paper, we would love to sit here and say, well, hey, we have these receivers. As long as we throw the ball, that's our identity. Or we have this running back. Hey, we're going to run the ball. That's our identity. But when you really talk about finding your identity, it's all about what you do consistently at a high level. And right now, they're trying to figure that part of this thing out. We can look at some of the runs that they've had where they were successful, but the inconsistency has been there. So it's like, that's not really their identity. We talk about some of the deeper throws down the field. We've seen a couple of those happen, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens and stuff like that, but still not enough of it. So when we're talking about that identity, I'm looking at it and saying, man, what are we going to start to hit on more consistently? Because that is going to be our defining characteristic. And once we can identify that, well, then we can start making a better form in terms of how to expand upon that. So then we can feel really good about this team going forward.
I think this team wants to be physical on every aspect of their offense as far as an identity, just because that's the way they like to do it. If you're physical up front, you win the line of scrimmage. I think too many times that's not happening, whether it's the running back not finding the correct hole, whether that's the offensive line not opening holes. It starts there with me, and then it opens up play action. And I don't think this is going to be an explosive offense necessarily here, but I do think if you establish that and you have some guys who are mismatches down the field, and man, they have some guys who are mismatches down the field. Chase Claypool is a big physical receiver. Take advantage of that. So is George Pickens. So is Pat Fryerman, Zach Gentry. They're all, to me, mismatches potentially, but you've got to be willing and able to throw the ball in their direction. But first off, you got to win that line of scrimmage more than I think they've been doing.
Dale, do you feel like the offensive line is taking maybe some more hits than necessary when it comes to not having things gel with this offense, whether it's the run game or being able to look downfield?
Yeah, I think the offensive line, when you look at it objectively, has played better than what we saw last year. And I think, the expectation was that this line was going to continue to grow as the season went on. Well, I think we've seen growth. If you think back to that game in Jacksonville in the second week of the preseason, there were holding penalties and sacks allowed and things of that nature. We haven't seen that. We haven't seen guys running free at the quarterback all that often. We've seen more holes being created here. I think they've largely played, to steal Mike Tomlinism, above the line to a large degree, and I think that's going to continue to improve. As the season goes on with so many young guys on that line. Now it's up to the rest of the offense to kind of carry along here and trust that the line is going to block things up, both for the quarterback and the running back.
I'm glad you said that key word, trust. because, like you said, this is very different from what we saw a couple of weeks ago in Jacksonville. So part of that, I do feel like is going to take some time for them to just truly believe in terms of the running game, in terms of the quarterback, trusting that they are going to have the protection they need, trust that the holes are going to consistently be there. Not saying that they haven't thus far, but that trust element is real, and it's hard to overlook, the bad plays that they had in the preseason, and now that they're playing well, just turn it on and say, hey man, I'm going to believe that this block is going to be there every single time. Now, on a short week after having 2 performances where we've seen them do some positive things, I do expect our offense to trust those guys a little bit more in terms of play calling, in terms of Mitch Trubisky taking a little bit more time to scan the field and go downfield, and Najee just hitting and Najee just getting north and south with some of his runs and stuff like that. I think we will see an uptick in that area because now we've seen 2 games in a row where this offensive line has, number 1, protected the quarterback, but number 2, has given Najee Harris some running lanes as well.
I think one thing you can also do to, kind of figure out what your identity is in the short term while things are struggling is to increase the tempo of your offense from time to time, and not just when you fall behind. I tend to say this a lot because I like it. Dale and Arthur, I'm sure you all believe that too. When you see them in this sort of up-tempo offense, things happen. You keep the defense back a little bit. Maybe you look for some advantages that you might not otherwise get with a more methodical pace. We saw that in the game last week. And I'm not suggesting using it all the time, but I do think every now and then, whether it's the start of the game, surprisingly, or at some point in the game, that can help you create a little momentum that can make some other things happen on your offense.
Well, one thing that happens when you do that, Pomp, and Arthur can maybe speak to this, when you go with tempo, it forces the defense to go a little more vanilla. And because they have their checks that they go to when things get speeded up a little bit, and it makes it much easier for the quarterback to get a read on the defense.
Yeah, I'm absolutely glad you brought that up because it is multifaceted. When you talk about being limited to a handful of calls, a lot of times, especially early on in the season, your empty menu or your hurry up defense menu is really 2 to 3 plays top. So once you see on that first play or 2, hey, they're in cover 3, well, you can be, you could rest assured that, hey, the rest of that drive, they're going to exclusively be in that same coverage and you can take advantage of it. That's the first part that I love about the tempo element. The second part, though, is it makes those defenders, those pass rushers get tired. So even if we might not necessarily love our matchup offensive line versus a particular D-line or pass rusher, when you use that tempo, now you're giving those guys a little bit more competitive advantage. Now you're even in the ground and ultimately hoping this offensive line being able to protect against some of the marquee guys that we're going to see. But the tempo element is a huge asset to this team, and I do agree with both of you guys. They need to implement that a little bit more intentionally.
How do you get Najee Harris going and maybe where we saw him during his rookie season, guys?
Well, to me, I think it's
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say for me, man, I think it's one of those things where you have to understand he missed time during training camp. And it wasn't just him not playing in the preseason games, but when you talk about the just everyday practice reps, those are some of the things that when you're watching him on tape and you're saying, well, man, why is he a little bit late on this cut? Or why is he so hesitant to do this, or he's prone to bouncing right here? It's just him getting his vision back. It's him getting back acclimated to the speed of the game. The NFL is not somewhere where you can just sit out for multiple weeks and you're going to come back and, hey, just pick it up like you never left. At this level, man, these guys are good. The game is very good and it's very fast. And I think for Najee, the more reps he gets, the more opportunity he gets to just be out there and just see it, it's going to come back to him very, very quickly. And we could see that at parts in last game, especially in the second half. It was less of the lateral and more of him putting his foot in the ground and getting north and south.
Yeah, to Arthur's point, I think, one of the things that makes Najee and made him a first-round draft pick is he's a volume back. He wants that heavy workload, and so I think the more he gets the football, the better he gets. And we really haven't gotten to see him get the ball as much as I think as the Steelers would have liked, especially in the run game, particularly in those first 2 games. I think the more carries he gets, the more effective he gets. And so as he gets more worked into game shape here, you're going to see a better Najee Harris.
All right.
I couldn't agree more with that, Dale. I think the same thing. The more, it's like anything else. You go away from it a little bit, come back, it's not there. It's just the more the game moves on, and the more he's involved, the more physical they get, I think it helps him as a runner. And you can also, kind of will yourself into more yards when you know your defense is, knowing it's coming and they may not be able to stop it if you get a good volume of it.
All right, and on the flip side, we need to talk about the Steelers' defense defending the run for the Cleveland Browns. But first, here is your Week 3 opening lines across the league presented by Unibet Sportsbook, an official sportsbook partner of the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you're in Pennsylvania and ready to place your wagers on any of this weekend's matchups, download the Unibet PA app or visit pa.unibet.com. And as I said, coming up next, the Browns run game. We know what they can do, a different quarterback, but they still have Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. We'll discuss that when we return. Welcome back to the Matchup Show presented by Unibet. Flipping over and talking about Cleveland's run game. And Dale, we know who the guys are. They have not changed. The Steelers actually did a pretty good job defending the run against them last season. But from the first 2 games we've seen this season, what are the problems that the Steelers defense is going to have with that tandem?
The problem would be Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. The Browns are averaging just over 200 yards rushing per game in their first 2 weeks of the season. Which is not real surprising to anybody. What is surprising is they've done that with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback, and Brissett hasn't exactly lit the world on fire. They haven't thrown a lot, but teams go into a game against the Cleveland Browns knowing they're going to get a healthy dose of Chubb and Hunt, and thus far haven't been able to stop it. Now the Steelers are a little bit more familiar with those 2 guys, and obviously with Larry Ogunjobi coming over, he's very familiar with those guys as well. So it's going to be interesting. That's going to be one of the big battles. We'll see if Jack Conklin, their right tackle, plays in this game. He didn't play last week against the Jets. They had James Hudson in there. He was a mid-round draft pick last year out of Cincinnati, kind of a project offensive tackle who needed to get bigger and stronger. And, they've got Joe Bitonio, who would line up opposite Ogunjobi, also maybe missing for this game. So we'll see what that looks like. The center is new this year as well. The Steelers are, again, very well versed in what the Browns like to do running the football. It's a matter of stopping it, though.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They don't have any questions about what their identity is. We know they want to line up in 12 personnel, 13 personnel, and run the ball downhill. But when you talk about our new additions, man, the Larry Ogunjobi, that's the one that I'm excited to see, man, now that he's on our side in this particular rivalry here, man. Let's see what he can do out there. Obviously, Cam Hayward chomping at the bit. But defensively, man, the guy that I'm going to really be looking forward to seeing, man, is Miles Jack. I think he is that X factor in terms of being able to stop this run. Because when you talk about a Nick Chubb and a Kareem Hunt like you did, Dale, both of those dudes are top notch. Both of those guys, when you talk about a drop off, you really don't experience that. But Miles Jack is going to have to be that guy that, continues to track those dudes down every single time they get an opportunity and keep them at bay. We know that they're not going to ever be completely shut out. But if you keep them at bay and make Jacoby Brissett have to be the guy, I think that's where we feel extremely confident in our defense.
The other thing I think Kevin Stefanski is going to learn from his mistake, which was getting away from the run in the last game and put it all on Baker Mayfield, who couldn't really throw the ball, and he was having issues with his arm. He knows the strength of this team has to be run, and he knows the Steelers last year had problems. He'll test that early on to see if the Steelers have amended that a little bit. They certainly did well in the first week. I'm sure you guys would agree in Cincinnati stopping Joe Mixon last week, not so much. But I also think when you're on the field, as much as this defense has been on the field, it kind of wears guys down. And they may not admit that. They may not say that. But my eyes tell me at the end of that New England game that they were a little bit worn down by being on the field so much. And now this is a short week. So the offense has to play a role here in limiting what Cleveland can do as well.
Arthur, no TJ Watt once again. Sorry about that. No TJ Watt once again for this game as well. What do the Steelers defense need to do differently than what we saw against the New England Patriots?
Well, Bob hit on some of this stuff. Fatigue did play a little bit of that late in the game, but the other part was this. When we talk about replacing a TJ Watt, you're not just replacing TJ Watt, the pass rusher. You're also replacing TJ Watt, the run stopper, the guy that gets the tackles for losses, the guy that is an ultimate intimidator at times when you see him out there. So what we ended up having to do was go to what we like to call a big nickel package, where you're going to have a Cam Hayward or a DeMarvin Leal playing your traditional DN spot, where that's where usually TJ Watt is. And you can get away with that at times, but the problem is when you're talking about the run fits consistently and late in the game when it's obvious run situations, that's where they were having a little bit of the slip-ups. And that was ultimately how, the Patriots were able to run that clock out at the end of the game. But to me, man, I think You still use some of that, but I don't think you have to get to that extreme where you're only running a big nickel package when you think it's an obvious run situation. I think you can trust the Malik Reed. I think you can trust some of your younger outside linebackers to give you some quality reps there, so you're not necessarily compromising the integrity of your defense, and you're not taking one of the most dominant D linemen that we've seen in this game in Cameron Hayward and taking him to a spot where he's more of a secondary player as an outside guy, whereas when he's at that 3 technique, that's his primary position. That's where he's his most dominant. So to me, I want to give him more opportunities there to be impactful, and I think that's going to be a bigger impact in stopping the run.
And I also think, the defense last week, I thought was okay. I mean, it's kind of difficult to stop teams in the NFL today, regardless of who's at quarterback, keeping them to, 17 points or less than that. And I think this defense did that largely. I mean, the one play was a throw up and go up and get the ball to Aguilar or for Witherspoon. Take chances. You got to make those plays. And minus that in the short field caused by the special teams blunder there, Dale. I thought this defense did a pretty good job of winning a game that they could have won had the offense scored more points. So if they can still come up with plays like this and limit Cleveland, they're going to be in every game, and I think they could certainly be in this game against a team that doesn't have their star quarterback right now.
Yeah, to your point, Bob, if you look back at that New England game, the Patriots had about 60 yards rushing through the first 3 quarters. You take that. What can happen is what did happen then in the fourth quarter, where they just couldn't get off the field at the end of the game when they did get worn down a little bit. Now, I just wonder how much of that, to Arthur's point, came from Cam Hayward having to rush from the outside pretty much the entire first 3 quarters of the game. He's coming from the outside a lot. There's a lot of extra bend around the edge and things of that nature, working in a spot that he's not quite as used to, as opposed to working just on the inside where it's just, okay, just power your way through the guard in this situation. So we'll see if they adjust that. I also think the Steelers, if they run the ball effectively in this game, and they should be able to do that. Cleveland's weak at defensive tackle. We know that they're not going to have Jadeveon Clowney in this game either. So they're a little weak there up front, other than Myles Garrett, who's an outstanding player, but he's just one guy. So if they can run the ball effectively themselves, that keeps Cleveland's offense from doing the same against them.
And gives the defense a breather, which they haven't had much of the first 2 games, especially that first game that went into overtime in Cincinnati. I also think, too, guys, the Cam Sutton dropped interception. He makes that. I think we're raving about the defense performing well without TJ Watt. So, of course, you'd like to change that. We all know how Cam is, and he has really good hands, so it is surprising that he wasn't able to pull that in. But, those events just kept trickling down, and it was the snowball effect, and unfortunately did not end in the Steelers' favor.
Yeah, that's one that Cam Hayward, I'm sure, or Cam Sutton, I'm sure, would love to have back. Probably catches that 9 out of 10 times, and, well, that was the one that he didn't.
All right.
Getting back to one other point, and that would be the safeties for Cleveland have had some problems here early on. And I think you saw Joe Flacco attack that late in the game. And I also think in the Carolina game, the Steelers, if they do run the ball well, this would be the game I would think that you could look down the field and expect some mismatches and throw the ball and see what happens. They're going to win, I believe, many of those jump ball situations if they're contested. So this would be the game to do it, and they certainly need that aspect of this offense to be part of the regular game plan.
All right, it's time now for our Yins Chat predictive question of the day. Over under Steelers offense, 255.5 yards of total offense. You can download the Steelers mobile app and play Yins Chat. Questions are updated daily. We're going to play it here. Dale, you're up first. Over under.
Oh, that's such a low total, and I understand that's what they're averaging right now. I'm going over that total. They have to be able to do better than that this week.
Arthur?
Yeah, I would agree. I got to go with the over as well, man. And in order for this team to win, they have to get over 255 yards of total offense. That should be the bare minimum. Yes, they should definitely get this.
I think they will too. At some point, they're going to break out of this. They have to. If they don't, they're going to have continual questions and doubts about this. This could be the game to do it. As I said, I don't like what's going on in that Cleveland secondary, and I think it can be exploited with some of the talent they have. So I would look for a lot of opportunities, more so down the field, and I think that total will be up. So yes, over.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Matchup Show presented by Unibet. For Dale Lolley, Arthur Moats, and Bob Pompeani, and Missi Matthews, thanks for joining us. We'll see everybody next week.